In other news, Mafia experts are weighing in on a spate of recent Montreal area arsons. They believe the crimes suggest the leadership of the Montreal mob is restructuring. The various arsons this year, including this one that leveled a strip mall in Laval, followed a handful of high-profile killings last year. Since the death of Vito Risotto in 2013, the experts say a leadership void needs to be filled. Who will emerge is anybody's guess, but many who follow the Mafia feel the new structure will be more democratic and open to joint ventures with other criminal groups.
Hoping the new administration will become more democratic. What could that possibly mean? She added clarifications, open to join new ventures with other criminal groups. We do know there was signs by the end of Rizzuto's life that the bond between New York and Montreal was severed. We know that the Rizzutos and the Rendas are married together. And at that point, New York had expressed desires to off a captain who was related to
Paulo Renda.
The scheme devised by Joseph Messino would end up ruining their relationship once Vito Rizzuto caught wind of what happened. Or did what she say the prevailing thought that street gangs? Vito himself warned us it was the new emerging threat come from rival street gangs. Some way, somehow, by his influence, Vito was repressing it. He was repressing it, sort of like containing it, like a lid. Now, remembering what she just said about being more open, thus more democratic, one could logically arrive to the next question. Has the new admin become more democratic, more open to share the influence, the supremacy on the island? And if you've been following our channel at all, you probably know the answer to that question. But if you don't, join us as we try to answer these important questions on the Canadian mob wars. We're all interested in deciphering what may be going on in our own streets. So sometimes we also get viewers' requests. Someone asked us to cover Spagnolo, and we shall honor said person's request. I don't pretend to know all the answers, but I sure as heck will look into them for us. Who's Nic Spagnolo? And what's the current situation about him? What's it about? Let's find answers. But first,
a presumed member of the Montreal Mafia was shot and killed in Laval on Saturday night. Police say Vincenzo Spagnolo had been shot at least once in his home. He was said to be an associate of Vito Risotto, the former head of a powerful crime family who died in 2013. The investigation has been now turned over to the SQ due to the victim's suspected ties to organized crime.
like father, like son. What's a mafia these days, really? You're as good as your earners. It's like the parable of having 20 chiefs, but only one Indian. Of course, you need many Indians, but you need chiefs. Specifically, you need chiefs with capital and connections. Connections for cartels and courts. The quadruple C's, if you will. First off, Vito was not a one-man army. Rather, he was a man inside of an army of families. And some of those names go back to Sicily, as the dynasties of Cattolica Eraclea have spread their nefarious wings all over the Americas. Chile, Argentina, and Mexico. You name it. For the North American Cosa Nostra has been doing this for decades. And accordingly, the Rizzuto clan has operated internationally. It's very likely you've never heard of the Contrera family. Within the bonds of familial destiny, it has married into the Rizzuto clan. They function sort of like an international enterprise, owning legitimate businesses, transporting goods internationally. They say to defeat the beast, you need to take care of its head, and you can certainly cut the snake right in the middle. But what often seems to happen is when the beast regenerates, it comes back at you with two heads. And this is where we are at. After the shakedown of Projet Colisée, the Rizzuto organization was in disarray, and then the finishing blow. Don Vito Rizzuto was extradited. Our government, though well-intentioned, can't escape the law of violence and monopolies, as it happened in Mexico under the Felipe Calderón administration. Breaking up the monopoly of a dominant criminal group has splintered one into dozens of cartels, warring each other, battling it out on the streets. It's a violence that hasn't been able to be contained ever since. Now, back to our story. Our government had created the opportunity for the usurpers to decide to strike and dismantle the Rizzuto organization. But ever since, the war hasn't ended, for the citizens of Montreal are hostage. They've been held as spectators for more than a decade, even today in 2023. It was early 2010, specifically January 24th. After many years of friendship, it seems underneath it all, there was a vendetta, and the only way to quench it was through fire. And for our audience who've been here with us for the last few months, the following will feel eerily familiar. A Molotov cocktail had pierced the windows of a restaurant in RDP. And if that didn't ring a bell, then the following surely will. This was the 15th attack in only 4 months, and I turn your attention to the perpetrators of these attacks, and his name was Mikendi Demosthenes, 18 years old. And he was suspected of having committed various Molotov cocktail attacks throughout the city in the fall of that year, so much so that since his arrest, the number of Molotov cocktail attacks have decreased. Here's a list of the attacks. On that same day, on June 24th, 2010, a son of a godfather lives the life at 23:20 p.m. in the glamorous part of downtown. He's in a vehicle collision, and the police come search his vehicle, where they find a Beretta 9mm. And at that point, he did not have a big criminal history on paper, although he was already acquitted of the accusation of possession of firearms in November of 2006. Other than that, he was also the son of Vincenzo Spagnolo, a veteran guard in the Montreal Mafia. And this is where it gets interesting, highlighting the fact that Vito was part of a team. His power was not only his, it was a shared dynamic. By the end of the 80s, Vito Rizzuto was under investigation for an importation scheme of 32 tons of hashish in Sept-Îles. Yup, he was in big trouble. Who do you think paid the $1 million bail for his liberation? They were so close that Godfather Vito Rizzuto would regularly telephone Spagnolo from prison during his extradition and imprisonment in the USA.
Vincenzo Spagnolo, on le connaît bien parce que lorsque Vito Rizzuto est revenu de son séjour forcé dans sa prison Super Maximum au Colorado à Florence pour le meurtre des capots de la Mafia à New York dans les années 80, c'est un peu Vincenzo Spagnolo qui a été son confident, son bras droit. C'est lui qui s'est rendu en République dominicaine avec lui, exemple, lorsque cette fameuse photo là, a été prise de Vito Rizzuto à l'aéroport.
So you've heard they were close to Vito Rizzuto, even after his liberation. But it also made the Spagnolos a target. The enemies of the Rizzutos had a choice to strike the father or the son. One would think the more veteran, the more prized. But their bounty must have been slashed down to 20,000 when they had killed the senior, Vincenzo. They must have really wanted Nic Spagnolo dead. And it also highlights how important he was to the new administration. Thus, by 2016, we know Spagnolo Jr. is a heavy hitter. So not only has he been a target a few times, put yourself in his position. His father died instead of himself, and the clan who he's been loyal to, its old administration has been decimated. They are long gone, and he has survived this long mob war. Remember, Leonardo was not in the picture until his father died, whereas Spagnolo has been in the crosshair this entire decade, and he has been rejuvenated with a new generation, of which he's at the table, a council of mafias. But with big money comes big responsibilities. You not only have to earn, you also have to stay away from trouble, because trouble generates heat, and heat attracts law enforcement's attention. And you would think that with Spagnolo's age, that would be a given. Plus, he was the son of a godfather like them, Leonardo and Sollecito. They've all lost fathers at the same time, sharing the same enemy. And we know that the enemies of my enemies are my friends. Or maybe it's the fact that the case has been so isolated that law enforcement has not been able to use it as a trampoline. Thus, it seems like Spagnolo's going to get away with it in terms of Canadian laws, where if there is a will, then there's a way. Félix Séguin, we have just learned that the police of Montreal think they have solved an attempted murder in the beginning of July in Old Montreal. This attempted murder implicates a Montreal Mafia member, is that right? Yes, our investigative bureau has learned that the mafioso Nic Spagnolo has been arrested by the Montreal police in collaboration with Laval law enforcement, who were investigating him for violent incidents in the old Montreal sometime in the last few weeks. Nic Spagnolo, if you do not recognize him, he's a close friend of Leonardo Rizzuto. They are part of the Sicilian faction. Mr. Spagnolo is known for having a very boiling personality, and it is extremely rare of a mafioso of his caliber to be arrested for events such as this one. Normally, they keep their profile low. This time, we don't know why Mr. Spagnolo lost control, and why it's him who stabbed a young man in the Old Port. The only thing we can be sure of is that he's been arrested for it. The SPVM refuses to give more information on this subject, but many sources do confirm the arrest of Nic Spagnolo. It's a news that's very important in the criminal underworld. At 2:15 a.m. on August 2nd, 2020, in the angles of Notre-Dame and Saint-François-Xavier, a call was made to 911 because a young man was stabbed. When the police arrived, they localized a 27-year-old man with injuries to the torso. The story is as follows. The young man would have talked to the lady that was there with Spagnolo, and he did not appreciate that. Perhaps being a made man in the Montreal Mafia made him feel a certain way. All we know is that at a certain point, an argument broke out, and it ended up with a young man getting stabbed after this dispute. Apparently, Spagnolo stabbed the individual right there in the middle of the street, outside. The prosecutor said it was a vicious hit and cowardly, and for the act they were claiming 4 years of imprisonment. One single blow. The victim lost an important quantity of blood, for which he had to recuperate at the hospital for many days. The 27-year-old man has to now live with 2 huge scars, the size of 15 centimeters and another of 30 centimeters. In the middle of his abdomen, I had worried about reprisals. I live in a state of hypervigilance, especially when someone rings at my door at unusual hours. Unsurprisingly, he refused to cooperate with the police. Further investigation as to who stabbed him. This is particular because they did mount evidence against him, which tells you they relied heavily on those cameras and rebuilding the scenario. They didn't have the victim's full cooperation, yet they were bringing Spagnolo to court. The authorities didn't exactly find an ace, but they certainly weren't going to allow Spagnolo to get away with it. The victim seems to have mounted the courage because by the end of this trial it looks like he had some words to say in court, or at least through his lawyers. Either way, he recounts a life with PTSD, where he relives the traumatic experience of dying over and over again. But besides that, Spagnolo has screwed up badly. For one, as a mafia boss, you don't want your movements restricted. But following the stabbing, he was released on the conditions that he respect the curfew between 10 p.m. and 6 in the morning. Not only that, he had to stay within Quebec and hand over his Canadian passport. But more importantly, never frequent establishments or restaurants serving alcohol. In layman's terms, he can't meet his buddies. Yes, they all own licensed establishments. Each one, directly or indirectly, such as that list of coffee shops that I showed you earlier. They're not burning each other's money laundering vehicles for nothing. Even in 2023, we've seen this tradition continue. And they generally don't do 9-to-5s. They spend the day meeting in parking lots or busy intersections in front of cafes with a cannoli, tapping each other's backs, having a great discussing business, or attending each other's weddings and funerals. These are traditions that have been going on in Montreal for decades.
Well, the man known as Montreal's Teflon Don is back in Canada. Vito Rizzuto landed at Pearson Airport after doing time in a U.S. prison in connection with a triple murder. Global's Mike Drolet has more on the homecoming of the reputed mob boss.
Alan, Vito Rizzuto is back on Canadian soil, and it's believed he's holed up with family in Woodbridge until he can figure out who his friends are. Rizzuto landed last night at Pearson and was promptly escorted out of the airport by police. He was once known as the Teflon Don for his ability to avoid criminal charges. That is, until 2004, when the RCMP got a treasure trove of information from a camera placed in his office, and he pled guilty in the U.S. to playing a role in the murder of 3 reported mob captains based in New York. That put him in jail for the past 6 years. He's out now, a fact his rivals, who took over Montreal in his absence, surely know.
What he has to really worry about is whether he'll be killed and how can he sweet talk. He's a smart guy, but how can he sweet talk his way out of this? I mean, he's become a major liability for the Mafia in Montreal.
Let's put it this way. In the Mafia, retirement is not an option, and revenge doesn't have a statute of limitation. So imagine a Pandora box. That is Quebec and Canada now. Anything can happen.
Now, when he refers to revenge, he's talking about Rizzuto. While he was in jail, his son was gunned down in the street, his brother-in-law was kidnapped, and his father was killed by a sniper standing in his own kitchen in front of his family. Now, put it all together and it seems like a gangster movie, but that's Vito Rizzuto's life.
By the way, thank you to everyone who stuck by me all this time. I really appreciate you. If it wasn't for you, I would have shut this down a long time ago. It's been a pleasure, and you're the only reason. Thank you. Let's enjoy our time together for the next 2-3 weeks. After that, I go back to work. My schedule will change a lot. I probably won't have as much energy to do as much content. Besides, I'm being restricted by YouTube. They want to review each video I upload for monetization. They want 8 to 10 days. It seems like they either want to police everything I say or discourage me from saying everything I do say. Regardless, we'll fight together, me and you, Crafty One. Join me, if you haven't already. I need you to bring you Canadian mob news.